Everyone who worked on Marino Romania's block learned the same two rules fast. Keep your head down when the black cars pull up, and never, under any circumstances, stare too long at the dog on the end of his chain. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's go back 2 hours before where it all started. Angelina Sabatini had obeyed those rules for 3 years. She brought coffee to men who tipped in folded hundreds, wiped blood from vinyl booze after quiet conversations turned loud, and pretended not to see Marino's soldiers vanish through the side door of the neon-lit diner. As long as she kept moving with a tired smile and a full pot, the danger stayed on the far side of the counter, and she could go home at closing with all her fingers attached. Then, one Friday night, the danger stepped right up to the front door. The street outside the diner pulsed with the usual end-of-week noise. Music rattled from car speakers. Laughter bounced between brick walls. The red diner sign washed the sidewalk and the nearest parked cars in a soft glow that made the whole block look almost friendly. The sound that sliced through all of it was not friendly. It was a low, ripping snarl that made the glasses on the shelves behind the bar tremble. Angelina was in the back, restocking napkins and mentally counting how many hours of sleep she could squeeze in before her morning shift, when the noise cut through the kitchen clatter. Someone shouted her name. Someone else yelled for everyone to stay inside. She pushed through the swinging door to the front and then out onto the sidewalk. In one breath, the world she knew turned strange. Marino stood in the middle of the road, legs set wide, shirt open at the throat, tattoos curling up his arms and across his chest. The streetlights and the neon sign painted him in red and gold. Both his hands were wrapped around a heavy chain that thrashed and rattled like something alive. Brutto was at the end of it. The Pitbull was a storm of muscle and teeth. His collar bristled with metal spikes. Foam clung to his jaws. When he lunged, all 4 paws left the ground, and Marino's boots scraped along the asphalt as he fought to hold the dog back. People stumbled away from the scene. Some ducked into their cars. Others froze where they stood, trapped between fascination and the urge to run. Across from Marino, a tight knot of men blocked the crosswalk. They were not locals. Their clothes, their swagger, the way they laughed, even as Brutto dragged Marino forward, marked them as outsiders who had come looking for trouble. One kicked over a patio chair, sending it skittering into the gutter. "Let him go, big man," one of them called. "Let the monster earn his keep." The crowd rippled nervously. Somewhere behind Angelina, someone shouted to call the police. Another voice answered that the police would not come here for this. Angelina's eyes went to Marino's face. His jaw was clamped so hard she could see the muscles jumping. His eyes had narrowed to hard slits. Sweat stood out on his brow as the chain slid in his hands and Brutto reared again, claws scraping sparks from the pavement. The dog suddenly snapped toward the nearest body that was not part of either group, a teenage boy with earbuds in, standing too close and too slow to understand what was happening. Brutto lunged. The boy's eyes went wide. The crowd screamed. Angelina did not think. Her body moved before her mind had time to argue. One moment she was on the diner's threshold, apron stained with coffee and grease. The next she was stepping off the curb into the empty strip of road between the panicking crowd and the enraged Pitbull, her hand lifting in a small, steady gesture like she was calming a drunk regular instead of a dog with a reputation for tearing through concrete. "Angelina, get back inside," the diner owner shouted behind her. His voice cracked. "Have you lost your mind?" Maybe she had. The chain sang as Brutto lunged again, dragging Marino half a step forward. Marino swore under his breath and lowered his center of gravity, bracing his legs and digging in for another pull. His security fanned out behind him, faces hard, hands near the edges of their jackets where weapons waited. Angelina did not look at them. She kept her eyes on the dog. For a stretched, brittle second, there was only Brutto, the loud crowd fading to a muffled hum at the edges of her hearing. His eyes burned the color of strong tea. His lips peeled back over ivory teeth that looked like they could snap her wrist in one bite. She should have been afraid. Instead, something else punched the breath from her lungs. She knew that face. She knew the jagged scar across his snout, the one that bent slightly to the left. She knew the way his right ear folded at the tip, as if it had never quite stood the way it was supposed to. She knew the uneven patch of white fur on his chest, the shape of a crooked heart she had once traced with small fingers and giggled over. The name ripped out of her before she could stop it. "Milo," she whispered. Bruto hesitated. It was so small a pause that anyone else might have missed it, just a tiny hitch in the ongoing attack. But Angelina saw. His ears flicked in her direction. Angelina took another careful step toward him, ignoring the roar of protest that rose behind her. She heard Marino's voice now, low and sharp, slicing right through the other sounds as he ordered her to move away. She could feel every eye on the street locked on the slender girl in the red apron, her empty hand reaching toward the most feared animal in the neighborhood. She wet her lips and spoke again, this time in the soft dialect her grandmother had used late at night when her bones ached and the old country felt closer than the apartment walls. "Fermo." The word floated out, quiet but clear. "Stop." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Bruto's entire body spasmed, as if someone had snapped an invisible leash tight around his ribs. His front paws hit the pavement with a dull smack and did not spring up again. His lips remained curled, but the noise inside his chest changed, rough fury grinding down into a ragged, bewildered whine. Angelina moved slowly. One step, another. The chain between dog and man drooped. Bruto's head tilted, ears high, nose working the air in rapid bursts. His pupils were blown wide, trembling. When she was close enough to feel the heat of his breath on her arm, she crouched, her heart hammering against her ribs hard enough to hurt. She did not look away from his eyes. Her hand shook only once as she reached for the thick neck where the fur was coarse from old scars. "Bravo, Milo," she murmured, voice barely more than air. The Pitbull shivered from shoulders to tail. A small, broken sound slipped from his throat. Then, as the entire block watched in stunned silence, the dog everyone avoided on sight leaned his massive head into the palm of a diner waitress and pressed there like he had finally found something solid. The street stopped breathing. Engines idled in the distance, strangely quiet. Phones that had been held up to film this disaster slowly lowered. A few people exchanged wide-eyed looks, as if asking each other whether they had really seen what they thought they saw. Marino did not look impressed. He looked like a man who had just watched someone pick up his loaded gun without asking. He jerked the chain once, sharp and testing. Bruto flinched, but refused to move away from Angelina's side. She could feel the thud of the dog's heart against her fingers. She could also feel Marino's gaze pressing between her shoulder blades. "Clear the street," he said. His men moved at once, herding people backward, snapping at them to go home, to forget it, to find something else to talk about. A few voices argued until Marino turned his head a fraction in their direction. Argument died fast after that. "You," he said, looking straight at Angelina now. His voice was quiet, but carried easily over the remaining murmurs. "You are coming with me. People do not control my dog. Not unless they have a reason." Angelina finally looked up at him. Up close, he was larger than he seemed from behind the counter. Power wrapped around him like a jacket. In his eyes, she saw more than anger. There was a sharp unease there, a calculation she did not like. Her legs wanted to fold. Instead, she stood, keeping one hand on Bruto's neck. The dog stayed glued to her, chain hanging loose. A hand touched her elbow. One of Marino's men stood there, a black man with a pale scar running from his cheekbone to his jaw. His voice was low enough that only she could hear. "Do not make him ask twice," he said. "He is in a generous mood. For now." Angelina looked down at the dog who had once slept with his head on her lap in a cold shelter, who now wore a spiked collar and a reputation for violence. Milo, she thought. Bruto. Both of them staring up at her with the same eyes. She swallowed hard, nodded, and let the man guide her toward the waiting car. Bruto patted at her heel, the chain clinking softly with each step as if they were already walking to a rhythm she half remembered. The car door shut with a heavy thud. The noise of the street vanished, replaced by the muffled hum of the engine and the sound of Bruto's breathing by her knee. In that enclosed space, with Marino watching her from the opposite seat, and the Pitbull lying at her feet like a piece of living dynamite. Angelina understood that every rule she had learned about this block had just changed. She had stepped into a world where the lines were written in blood, not ink, and there would be no slipping quietly back behind the counter. What neither Marino nor the men in the front seats knew was that this was not the first time Angelina Sabatini had reached into the chaos of this dog's life and pulled him back. The first time had been years earlier, in a cramped city shelter that smelled of bleach and fear, when his name was still Milo, and she still believed that every good dog eventually found safe home. That was before she learned what really happened to him. Back then, her life had been small and predictable, measured in coffee refills and the clatter of plates. Most mornings started in the dark. Angelina woke to the thump of bass from the bar downstairs, the last stragglers of the night banging cups or arguing about taxis. Her room sat directly above the back entrance, which meant she got the noise, the cigarette smoke, and the smell of spilled beer for free. The apartment itself was barely more than a rectangle. One narrow bed pressed against the wall, a hot plate on a metal shelf, a tiny bathroom where she could touch both walls if she stretched out her arms. Paint peeled in long curls near the window. In winter, cold pressed through the glass like a living thing. In summer, the air conditioner rattled so loudly she had to choose between sleep and cool air. On a small table under the window sat a jar with a strip of tape on the front. She had written Mama on it in blue ink. Most weeks, she slipped in a few crumpled notes from her tips, knowing they would disappear on her next visit to the care home. Her mother's illness had started slow, forgetting small things, leaving tea to cool on the stove. Then the doctor visits and the tests and the words that never quite seemed real. Medication cost money. Supervision cost more. When it became too dangerous for her mother to live alone, Angelina's aunt took the younger brother to live in another town, and the care home took her mother when the hospital would not keep her any longer. Angelina kept them both floating with diner wages and whatever extra shifts she could grab. She sent money to her brother every month, even when it meant she ate plain pasta for days. Her own dreams shrank quietly in the background. Once she had one at culinary school, maybe her own place, somewhere bright and clean where nobody yelled. Now she wanted the rent paid on time and her mother's medication renewed without a fight from the pharmacy. The diner was the center of that life. Morning shifts meant truck drivers, nurses coming off nights, and parents bribing kids with pancakes. Evening shifts meant regulars from the neighborhood, loud laughter, and the occasional argument that ended with apology pie. Late shifts, the ones she took when she needed extra money, belonged to Marino's people. They treated the diner like a neutral ground. Deals were whispered over metal coffee pots and sticky menus. Men with careful eyes and quick hands slid into booths, ordered simple meals, and tipped heavily. The owner pretended not to notice, so Angelina did the same. She learned who liked their coffee black, who wanted sugar, who never spoke at all. On her rare days off, she took the bus across town to the animal shelter. It had started as a school project years before, a required volunteer credit. She had kept going long after the credit was earned. The shelter was cramped, every wall lined with metal cages stacked too high. The air smelled of disinfectant, wet fur, and something sad that never quite went away. Dogs barked, whined, or lay curled in the backs of their cages, eyes dull. Angelina moved through the rows with pockets full of biscuits and a notebook where she wrote down which dogs ate, which hid, which snapped at hands. She spoke to them in gentle Italian, the way her grandmother had spoken to her when she was small. The older woman lived in the same building when Angelina was a child, her accent thick, her stories full of a village half a world away. Animals understand tone, her grandmother would say, sitting in a faded armchair with a dog-eared book on her knees. Words help, but the heart comes first. Still, it does not hurt to give them both. She taught Angelina old commands that her own parents barely remembered, soft syllables from a dialect that felt like music more than language. Sit, stay, come, enough, good. The shelter staff noticed quickly that the nervous dogs calmed faster around Angelina. They started pairing her with the cases that needed patience. That was how she met Milo. He arrived on a rainy Thursday, soggy and shivering, a young pit bull with ribs pressing through his coat and eyes that tracked every movement as if waiting for the next blow. The intake sheet said stray, found near construction site. No collar, no microchip. Angelina sat cross-legged outside his cage and just talked to him for a while. The first day, he stayed in the back corner, body pressed tight to the wall, trembling. The second day, he crept forward far enough to sniff her fingers through the bars. The third day, he took a biscuit and licked the crumbs from her palm. She named him Milo because it felt gentle. When storms rolled in, the whole shelter seemed to tense. Thunder made the younger dogs howl and the older ones pace. On those nights, Angelina stayed later than she should, sitting by Milo's cage. He would shake so hard his claws clicked on the metal floor. She started humming for him, the same lullaby her grandmother used when lightning lit their old living room. "Dormi, piccolo," she would murmur. "Sleep, little one." Sometimes she switched to the dialect commands, making games out of them. She would say the word for sit and reward him when he folded his legs neatly. She would say the word for stay and take 2 steps back, praising him when he held still. His ears perked when she used those phrases, as if they carried a flavor no other voice had. Weeks turned into months. Milo put on weight. His coat grew shiny. Staff joked that if she was not careful, she would end up sneaking him home in her backpack. Adoption events came and went, but the blocky head and broad chest made strangers walk past his cage. They saw a breed, not the dog who rolled on his back for belly rubs and pressed his head in her chest when thunder shook the windows. Angelina asked about signing for him more than once. The answer was always the same. Her landlord allowed no animals. Her bank account allowed no fines. "It will be all right," she told Milo each time she had to leave. "Someone good will come. They have to." The day he disappeared started like any other volunteer shift. The sky was clear. The bus ran late. Angelina arrived with a bag of cheap biscuits and a paperback tucked under her arm for the quiet minutes. She knew something was off before she reached his row. The barking sounded different, a little thinner. The air felt strangely empty. Milo's usual greeting, a soft whine and the thump of his tail against metal, did not come. When she turned the corner, his cage stood open. For a moment, she thought staff were cleaning it. Then she saw that the food bowl was gone too. The blanket she had brought from home, washed so many times the pattern had faded, was missing. "Maria," she called, spotting one of the workers stacking paperwork behind the front desk. "Where is Milo?" "Oh," the woman said, barely glancing up. "He got adopted this morning. A walk-in. You just missed them." Angelina's heart leaped, then stumbled. "Adopted? By who? I did not see any forms." "Man came in early," the woman said. "Said he had a big yard. Looked decent. Dan handled it." Dan, the part-time handler, emerged from the back with a mop. At Angelina's stare, he shrugged. "He liked the dog," Dan said. "Had cash for the fee. We are full, Angie. We do not always have time for a parade." "Did you copy his ID at least?" she asked. "A phone number?" Another shrug. "You worry too much," Maria said briskly. "You should be happy. That dog needed out of here." Maybe they were right. The shelter was bursting. Dogs came in faster than they left. A sudden adoption was a gift. Still, unease stirred in her stomach. "What kind of man?" she pressed. "Old? Young? Did he say where he lived?" Dan frowned, trying to remember. "Clean clothes. Nice watch. Short hair. Smelled like gasoline," he said finally. "Drove off in a dark car. That is all I have." It was not enough. Not for paperwork. Not for a search. Angelina walked back to the empty cage and gripped the bars with both hands. The quiet pressed against her. No tail thumping. No warm shape crowding forward. She imagined Milo in a real home, sunlight on his face, green grass under his paws. She held on to that picture as tightly as she had held the cage. That is good, she told herself. That is what matters. She tried to believe it when the staff told her to stop asking. She tried to believe it when weeks passed and no one called the shelter with a complaint about a pit bull who would not settle. Life at the diner blurred back into focus. Bills demanded attention. Her mother had a bad month and needed a new medication. Her brother's school needed money for a trip. Little by little, the ache dulled. She folded the memory of Milo into the part of her heart she did not take out very often. Years later, sitting in Marino's car with Bruto's head heavy on her knee, that old ache tore open. The leather seat under her felt too soft, too expensive. The air smelled of cologne and metal and the faint tang of Bruto's breath. She had not spoken since they left the diner. Her throat felt tight, as if one wrong word might snap everything around her out of this strange, fragile calm. Marino sat across from her, one arm draped casually along the back of the seat, as if he were riding to dinner instead of hauling a waitress away in front of half the neighborhood. His eyes were not casual. They tracked every tiny movement she made, weighing and measuring. Bruto lay on the floor between them, chain still attached to his collar, the other end loose in Marino's hand. The dog's eyes were closed now, but his ears twitched whenever Angelina shifted. When she lowered her fingers to the thick fur at his neck, he breathed out a long, slow sigh and relaxed further. "How do you know that command?" Marino asked. The question arrived without warning. His voice was flat, but something sharp lurked under it. She kept her gaze on the dog. "My grandmother used to speak that way," she said. "Old words. I picked them up." "Plenty of people have grandmothers," Marino replied. "My dog does not listen to them." Angelina felt his stare digging into her profile. She stroked Bruto's neck, feeling the ridges of scars beneath the fur. "Milo. Bruto." The two names tangled in her head. "He knows me," she said quietly. "From where?" The car rolled through familiar streets, then passed them into areas she did not recognize. Shops gave way to warehouses. The glow of the diner sign disappeared behind them. Her stomach nodded. "At a shelter," she answered. "Years ago. He was called Milo then." There was a very small silence. "That is not possible," Marino said. "I got it from a man who owed me. He came trained to bite, not trained to sit for lullabies." Angelina turned her head to meet his eyes. What she saw there was not simple denial. It was something closer to hostility at the idea that someone might have touched his property before he did. "You can ask whoever you bought him from," she said. "Ask where they got him. Ask why he already knew old words from a village he has never seen." Bruto stirred as if he understood his story was being discussed. He nudged his nose against Angelina's palm and licked her wrist once, tentative. Marino watched that small gesture like it was a puzzle he did not enjoy. "Whether you are lying or not," he said finally, "you have a hold on him that my men do not. That is useful. It is also dangerous." The car turned again. Angelina saw highway signs she did not know, then darker stretches of road where streetlights thinned. The city's heartbeat faded behind them, replaced by long shadows and the distant glow of scattered buildings. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere we can talk without phones recording," he said, "and without children running under the dog's teeth." Her mouth went dry. She looked out the window. No familiar corners. No bus stop she used. No chance to claim she had to get out for work. She was far outside the routes where she knew which drivers might stop if she waved. The car finally slowed, turning onto a narrow lane lined with trees. Ahead, tall gates rose out of the dark, metal bars set into heavy posts. A small guardhouse squatted beside them, lights spilling from the single window. Two men stepped out as the car approached, hands resting lightly on the weapons at their belts until they recognized the vehicle. The gate rolled open with a mechanical groan. Beyond it, Angelina glimpsed a long driveway, shadowed buildings, and what looked like a stretch of fence ground that might be a yard or a training field. Floodlights stood ready to turn night into day with the flip of a switch. The car passed through. The gate closed behind them with a ringing finality that made her chest tighten. Bruto shifted, pressing closer against her leg as if he could sense her sudden fear. She curled her fingers into his fur. It struck her then, with cold clarity, that the street outside the diner had never really been the dangerous place. That had only been the doorway. The danger was here, behind tall gates and quiet guards, where she was arriving as an uninvited guest who had just proven she could control the one thing Marino Romania trusted more than his own men. For the first time since she had stepped off the curb, Angelina Sabatini understood that she had no idea what would be asked of her next, or if she would be allowed to refuse. The car rolled to a stop in front of a long, low building. Floodlights flickered on, washing the gravel in harsh white. Angelina blinked against the sudden glare. Outside the tinted window, she could see movement, the silhouettes of men turning toward the vehicle, the glint of metal at hips and shoulders. Marino opened his door without hurry. The cool night air rushed in. Brutto lifted his head from Angelina's knee and sniffed, muscles tightening with interest. "Out," Marino said. Her fingers were stiff when she reached for the handle. She stepped onto the gravel, and her shoes crunched loudly in the quiet. The property stretched around them, larger than she had realized from the road. To the left stood a row of sheds and a longer warehouse-type structure with a roll-up door. To the right, a rectangle of chain-link fence enclosed a hard-packed yard. Beyond it, she could see wooden obstacles, concrete blocks, old tires, even a few stacked pallets that made rough steps. Barking came from somewhere behind the warehouse. Deep, excited, not fearful. More than one dog. Security guards in dark clothes stood along the edges of the yard, some with rifles slung across their chests, others with pistols at their belts. A pair of men sat on overturned crates, cleaning pieces of a disassembled weapon with practiced hands. Nearby, a pallet of unlabeled boxes was wrapped in plastic, the corners dented and scuffed. It did not look like a home. It looked like a place where people prepared for war. Brutto jumped out beside her, landing lightly despite his size. The chain dragged between him and Marino, links clinking. The dog's ears were forward, tail held high, body vibrating with tension. He knew this place. Angelina watched him scan the yard, nostrils flaring. His posture shifted subtly, alert in a different way than he had been on the street, less frantic, more focused. Here, he understood the rules. "Eyes forward," Marino said, pulling her attention back. "You are my house now." He led them through a gap in the fence into the training yard. Men paused on the perimeter, watching curiously. No one spoke, but the murmur of conversation faded as they turned. Marino stopped in the center of the packed dirt and let the chain slacken. Brutto stood at his side, chest heaving. "This is where I shape my animals," Marino said. "The ones on 2 legs and the ones on 4. Tonight, I want to see what kind of trick you played on mine." Angelina swallowed. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and the faint tang of gun oil. He raised his voice without shouting. "Everyone watch," he called. "Looks like my dog listens to waitresses now." A ripple of low laughter traveled around the yard, laced with unease. Marino gave the chain a jerk and barked an order at Brutto in Italian. The dog responded, but his movements were slow, reluctant. He sat, then rose again before Marino finished the next command. His gaze kept sliding toward Angelina. "You see," Marino said. "He understands, but he chooses when to care." He turned to her. "Make him lie down," he said. The eyes around the yard shifted to her. Angelina felt every stare like a weight on her shoulders. Her mouth was dry. She took one step closer and forced herself to exhale. Brutto's tail wagged once, uncertain, as if asking whether this was real. She used the word her grandmother had used when calling the family dog from the kitchen tiles. "Chew," she said gently. Brutto watched her for a heartbeat, then folded his legs and dropped flat to the dirt so quickly that the chain snapped taut. A few of the men swore under their breath. "Up," she said, switching to the dialect again. He sprang to his feet. "Here," she added, patting her leg. He trotted straight to her, leaving Marino to gather slack chain behind him, and pressed his head against her hip, eyes bright. The yard buzzed with whispers. She did not even raise her voice. Someone muttered. Marino studied them in silence. His suspicion had not faded, but it was no longer bare. It had teeth of its own, calculating, searching for angles. "What else can you make him do?" he asked. Angelina hesitated. "Simple things," she said. "He knows sit, stay, heel. I used treats back then. Now he comes for my voice." "Do it," Marino said. She led Brutto through a small circle of commands, her words soft in the heavy air. "Sit, stay, come." Each time, he obeyed without hesitation, eyes fixed on her face. The laughter had stopped completely now. Several of the guards exchanged looks that were not quite fear, not quite respect. Marino's gaze moved between the dog and the girl, the line of his mouth thinning. You trained him like this in the shelter, he said eventually. Yes, she answered. He was afraid of everything. Loud noises, fast movements, even metal bowls. We went slow, and someone took that soft dog, Marino said quietly, and turned him into this. He flicked fingers at the scars along Bruto's shoulders. Angelina could not stop the bitterness that rose. Someone did more than turn him, she said. Someone hurt him. A lot. There was open on the air between them. Marino's eyes hardened, but not at her words. More at the truth inside them. You think I did that? He asked. You hold the chain, she replied. That is all I know. The men around them shifted, surprised at her nerve. One of them coughed, as if to warn her. Another frowned, waiting to see how their boss reacted. For a moment she expected fury. Instead, Marino laughed once without humor. You are brave, little waitress, he said, where you have not lived long enough to be afraid properly. I have seen enough, Angelina replied. I know what happens to dogs like him when they're only weapons. They do not live long. They do not die well. You think he prefers cages and concrete floors? Marino asked. I feed him meat, not scraps. I keep him strong. No one lays a hand on him without going through me. This is safety where I come from. Safety is not the same as kindness, she said. He is not a gun. He is a living creature. He should not have to choose between hurting and being hurt. Whispers sparked again. People did not usually lecture Marino Romania on ethics in the middle of his own yard. His jaw flexed. In my world, things with teeth either bite for me or against me, he said. There is no middle. She met his gaze and did not look away, although her heart pounded against her ribs. Maybe his world can be different, she said, even if yours is not. He watched her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. It was the look of a man not used to being challenged, weighing whether to correct the problem by force. Before he could answer, the crunch of tires on gravel broke the tension. A dark car rolled through a smaller gate and stopped near the warehouse. The man who stepped out closed the door with a lazy flick of his wrist, smoothing his dark hair back from his forehead. His clothes were sharp, his shoes too clean for this dirt. A quick smile flashed as he walked, but the smile did not reach his eyes. Boss, he called, spreading his arms as he approached. You throw a party and do not invite me? Marino's expression tightened. Rocco, he said, you are late. Rocco Valley shrugged like time belonged to him. I was working, he said, keeping problems off your doorstep. Then I hear the dog had a scene in front of your favorite diner. His gaze slid to Angelina, taking in the apron, the smudged knees from where she had knelt in the street, the way Bruto stood tight to her side. And that you found a new entertainer, he added. Angelina felt the weight of his attention and did not like it. Something about his eyes made her think of slick floors, places where a wrong step meant a hard fall. This is the girl, Marino said, watching Rocco. She walked onto my street and told Bruto to lie down. He listened. Rocco chuckled, but it sounded thin. Everyone loves a magic trick, he said. Maybe the dog liked her perfume. He stepped closer, hand out as if to stroke Bruto's head. The reaction was immediate. Bruto exploded into motion, every muscle snapping taut. He lunged, not toward Marino or the circle of strangers, but toward Rocco. Only Angelina's grip on his collar and the chain in Marino's hand kept him from reaching the man's extended fingers. The growl that tore from his chest was deeper than anything she had heard on the sidewalk, raw and terrified and enraged all at once. His body angled sideways, placing himself between Rocco and Angelina, teeth bared, eyes wild. Guards surged forward. Several reached for their weapons. The air filled with shouted warnings. Back, Angelina said quickly, using the command again, hand buried in Bruto's fur. Milo back. It is all right. It was not all right, but the sound of her voice cut through his panic enough that he did not throw his full weight against the chain. He stayed planted, every line of his body aimed at Rocco. Rocco had frozen mid-step, hands still stretched out. For one heartbeat, his expression was naked, not fear exactly, but recognition. Then the smooth smile slid back into place. Guess he does not like my cologne, he said lightly, withdrawing his hand. Marino's gaze sharpened. He has never gone at you like that before, he said. He is a dog, Rocco replied. Sometimes they decide they are in charge. You know how it is. Not with me, Marino said. Silence settled for a moment. Only Bruto's low growl vibrated in the space between the three of them. Angelina watched Rocco carefully. The dog's terror felt specific, not general. This was not how he reacted to every stranger. She had seen him around shouting men on the street, around honking cars and banging trays. He had not gone wild like this until this man stepped close. You have handled him before? She asked Rocco quietly. He lifted an eyebrow. Of course, he said. I take him for runs when the boss is busy. The dog knows who feeds him. Angelina looked down at Bruto. His lips were still curled, but his tail had tucked low. Not a challenge, she thought. A warning. He was afraid. Marino must have read some of the same thing because he turned his head slightly, addressing the yard without taking his eyes off Rocco. Everyone relax, he said. The show is over. Guns lowered slowly. He gave the chain a firm tug, and Bruto reluctantly eased back half a step. Angelina kept her hand on his neck, murmuring to him until the vibration in his chest eased from a snarl to a restless pant. Rocco slipped his hands into his pockets. If you want, I can take him tomorrow, he said. Run him a bit. Work off the edge. Animals act out when they are bored. That will not be necessary, Marino said. His tone allowed no argument. Rocco's smile flickered, then returned. Your call, he said. Maybe the new girl can teach me her tricks sometime. His eyes flicked over Angelina again in a way that made her skin crawl. Then he turned toward the warehouse, calling out a greeting to one of the guards as if nothing unusual had happened. When he was far enough away that his footsteps faded, Marino looked at Angelina. You noticed that, he said. Yes, she answered. He is not scared of you. He is scared of him. Marino's jaw worked. Rocco has been with me a long time, he said. He would not be stupid enough to lay a hand on what is mine without permission. Angelina did not respond. She had no safe opinion about that. Marino wrapped the chain around his hand twice, thoughtful. Whatever the reason, he said, the dog listens to you. That makes you valuable. She opened her mouth to ask what that meant, but he was already speaking again. You are not going back to the diner, he said. From now on, you work for me. You feed him, train him, keep him calm when I need him calm, and furious when I need him furious. You will stay on this property until I decide otherwise. Her heart lurched. My mother, she said. My brother. They will wonder where I am. I have shifts. Rent. I will see that your rent is paid, he said. Your family will receive money. The diner can find another girl to pour coffee. That is not your choice, she said, the words out before she could stop them. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the small scar beside his eyebrow, the flecks of tiredness at the edges of his gaze. You stepped in front of my dog, he said quietly. You took his teeth out of my hands in front of enemies and friends. You made me look like I did not know my own animal. That could have ended in blood. Instead, it ended with him choosing you. He nodded toward Bruto, who was pressed against her thigh like a shadow. So now you are responsible for that choice, Marino went on. You want him to live differently, fine. Show me. But you do it here where I can see it. The guards watched, pretending not to listen. Angelina's throat worked as she looked around the fenced yard, the weapons, the dark shapes of buildings under the floodlights. It felt like the entire world had shrunk to this patch of dirt and the heavy chain in Marino's hand. Do I have a choice? She asked. He considered her for a beat. You have the choice to make this easy, he said. Or not. That was answer enough. Bruto nudged her hand, as if urging her to agree simply so they could all breathe again. She closed her eyes for a second, then nodded. All right, she said. I will work with him. But if you want him to be more than a weapon, you do things my way. A faint spark of interest flickered in Marino's eyes. We will see, he said. He turned away, calling to one of the guards to show her where she would sleep. The man with the scar on his cheek approached and jerked his head toward the main building. Angelina followed, Bruto trotting beside her, chain clinking. Behind them, the gate to the training yard swung slowly shut, the latch closing with a dull final sound that told her exactly how hard leaving would be now that she belonged to the same world as the dog everyone feared. The room they gave her that night was on the second floor of the main building. It held a narrow bed, a wardrobe, a small desk, and a window that looked over the fenced yard. The sheets smelled like detergent and dust. A metal water bowl sat just inside the door for Bruto. That small detail told her this space had not been prepared for her, but for whoever needed to stay near the dog. Sleep came in scraps. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the chain, the crowd, the way Milo had pressed his head into her palm. Each time she opened them, she saw him curled on the floor beside the bed, rib cage rising and falling, collar spikes catching the light that crept under the curtain. Morning arrived with shouted orders in the yard and the rumble of engines somewhere beyond the buildings. A knock at her door brought a tray of food and a terse instruction from the scarred guard. "Boss wants you in the training room," he said. "Finish and come down." The training room turned out to be a long, low space beside the yard. One wall was lined with hooks holding leashes, chains, muzzles, and harnesses. Another held metal cabinets and a hose coiled neatly on brackets. The concrete floor was stained in places that soap had not fully erased. Bruto padded in ahead of her, nails tapping quietly. Here the air smelled strongly of dog, bleach, and something metallic that clung to the back of her throat. "Start," Marino said from his place near the doorway. "I want to see how you work when we're not performing for the crowd." Angelina swallowed and stepped into the center of the room. She had no treats, no toys. Only her voice and a dog had been dragged through years she did not know. "Seduto," she said. Bruto sat quick and neat. "Bravo," she said softly. "Jew." He lay down, tail sweeping once. The commands were simple, but she stretched them, adding pauses, changing distance. "Stay" while she crossed the room. "Come" when she was near the wall. "Heel" as she walked slow circles. Bruto responded with the eager focus she remembered from the shelter, the same light in his eyes when he understood he was doing well. Hours blurred into a pattern. She worked him in short bursts, letting him rest, then starting again. When he got something right, she praised him with touch and tone. When he hesitated, she broke the movement into smaller steps. By midday, his tongue hung out, sides heaving. She filled the bowl from the hose. He drank greedily, water dripping down his chin. "He is capable of more," Marino said from the door. "He has been used in ways you clearly have not seen." Angelina heard the words but kept her gaze on the dog. "If you want him stable, you start here," she answered. "Foundation first. Otherwise, he will always be waiting for the next hurt." "Dogs are not people," Marino said. She stroked Bruto's head. "No," she said. "Sometimes they are better." He did not argue, but she felt his attention on her as she worked through the afternoon. It was during one of those sessions that she saw the first crack in Bruto's composure. She had just called him to her side when a sharp metallic clang rang out from the yard. Someone had dropped a gate or slammed a piece of equipment into the concrete. The sound echoed into the room like the slam of a heavy door. Bruto flinched so violently that his hind legs slid out from under him. His body went low to the ground, belly almost scraping the floor, eyes blown wide. A whine squeezed out between his teeth. He stared at the doorway, trembling. "Hey," Angelina said quickly, crouching. "Hey, it is all right. Milo guarda me. Look at me." It took 3 repetitions before he dragged his gaze away from the door to her face. His tongue flicked nervously. When she touched his shoulder, he flinched again but did not pull away. Marino had gone still. "He does not usually react like that," he said. "Then something about that sound means pain to him," Angelina replied. "Or fear, or both." She made a note in her head. Loud metal crash, severe reaction. The next trigger came later, during a break. She stepped outside for air while Bruto lay sprawled on the cool floor. Near the corner of the building, 2 men stood by a parked car, smoking. One had splashed some kind of strong gasoline on his boots or clothes. The sour scent rode the breeze, mixed with a sharp, artificial cologne. When Angelina opened the training room door again, that smell slipped inside with her. Bruto's head shot up. He sniffed once, then sprang to his feet. The change was instant and terrifying. His tail tucked tight. The whites of his eyes showed. A harsh panting began, something close to a panic attack in dog form. "Milo," she called, alarmed. "What is it?" He paced the length of the room and back, claws scrabbling, nose working frantically toward the door as if expecting something awful to burst through it. When she moved to block his path, he veered away, not snapping at her, but too frantic to slow down. She checked the hallway. Empty, aside from the fading smell. "Is it the scent?" she murmured. "Gasoline and cologne together." He shoved his head against her hip, shaking. She wrapped her arms around his thick neck, feeling the tremors run through him. Marino appeared at the doorway, brows drawn. "What happened?" he asked. "Someone outside smells like a garage and cheap aftershave," she said. It sent him straight into panic. His eyes narrowed. "Which men?" "I did not look closely," she said. "They were near one of the cars." "I will find out," he said. "You calm a dog." She did, gradually with soft words and long, slow strokes down his back. By the time Bruto's breathing settled, sweat dampened Angelina's own neck. It felt like holding a thunderstorm against her chest and waiting for the lightning to pass. That night, in the small room upstairs, she took a pen from the desk and began a list on the back of an old receipt. Metal gate slamming. Severe reaction. Smell of gasoline plus strong cologne. Severe reaction. She stared at the words, tapping the pen. "This did not come from nowhere," she whispered. Over the next days, she collected more pieces. A certain type of whistle from a far corner of the property made Bruto freeze, then start to shake. The distant echo of men shouting in unison, like a crowd, caused him to pace the room, restless and unhappy, even when no one came near. The scrape of a metal chain dragged across rough floor made him flinch so hard he banged his head against her knee. Each time she comforted him, then wrote it down later when no one was watching. Between sessions, she began to watch the people around him more closely. The scarred guard kept his distance from Bruto unless asked to help. He moved with the cautious respect of someone who understood that teeth were not toys. Other men joked nervously when the dog passed, some reaching out for a hurried pat when they thought no one would notice. Then there was Rocco. Every time he stepped into the yard, Bruto changed. Even if the dog had been relaxed moments before, tongue lolling, weight leaning into Angelina's hand, the sight of Rocco crossing the gravel made his entire body stiffen. His ears flattened. His gaze locked on the man with haunted intensity. If Rocco came too close, even within several strides, Bruto's calm shattered. The growl started low, almost inaudible, then built. He did not try to launch at every person on the property. He did not throw himself at the fence when guards traded shifts. But when Rocco's polished shoes hit the packed dirt, Bruto became a different animal. Angelina pretended not to stare, but she absorbed every detail. Rocco never flinched, never openly acknowledged the reaction. He would adjust his cuff, shift his watch band, remark on the weather. Once, he tossed off a light joke about the mutt needing his manners brushed. He did not trot at Rocco's side the way he did with Angelina. He strained against a thick chain, claws scrabbling for grip, mouth already open in a pant that looked too fast to be simple excitement. One of the masked men had both hands on the links, leaning back with his full weight. "Put him there," Rocco said. The camera did not pick up every word perfectly, but enough. He pointed to the center of the room. They looped Bruto's chain through a metal ring set in the floor that Angelina had not noticed before. Up close, the ring had scars around it too, dark and irregular. Rocco crouched in front of Bruto and slapped his cheek lightly, once, twice, the way a man might slap his own face to wake up. "You remember how this works?" "Yeah," he said, voice clear now. "One dog leaves walking. The other leaves in a bag." Angelina's hand tightened on the phone until her knuckles whitened. On the screen, Bruto's behavior did not look like eager anticipation. It looked like barely contained terror. His tail was stiff, not loose. The panting had a ragged edge. When the crate clanged as they set it down, he flinched and looked away for a second, as if searching for an exit that did not exist. Rocco nodded toward the crate. "Open it," he ordered. One of the masked men hesitated. "He is small," the man said. "You sure the big one will not tear him apart too fast?" "What do you think this is?" Rocco replied. "A puppy play date? He needs to get sharp for tonight. I do not care if it lasts 10 minutes or 10 seconds. He tastes blood. He remembers who he is." Angelina's stomach rolled. They unlatched the crate. The small dog tried to dig backward, but there was nowhere to go. A hand reached in, grabbed it by the scruff, and yanked it on the floor. It stumbled, nails scrabbling, and then froze when it saw Bruto. "Bring him in," Rocco said. The masked man with the chain jerked Bruto forward. The big dog fought the pull, planting his feet, head turning away from the smaller animal. His body screamed refusal in every line, but the chain dragged him close. Rocco clucked his tongue. "Do not embarrass me now," he said low. "You have a job." He snapped his fingers sharply in front of Bruto's face. The sound made the smaller dog flinch in terror. Bruto's body jerked as well, a conditioned response, as if that snap had been paired with something worse many times before. Rocco leaned in closer. "You do this good, it all goes smooth," he murmured. "You tear something tonight, people do not pay attention to what else is moving through the building. You act soft, we all have problems." He straightened and raised his voice again. "Tonight we have a shipment coming in with the crowd," he said to the masked men. "No one will look twice at a few extra boxes when they're screaming over a dog tearing another one up. We get the goods in, we get the boss in the right place, and no one sees the other part." "The other part," one of the men echoed. "You mean the accident?" Rocco's smile was thin. "Yeah," he said. "The accident. Crowded warehouse by the river. Drunk men, guns in too many hands, two fighting dogs in the middle. If something happens to Marino in that mess, what can anyone say? Tragic, but these things happen in our line of work." "You sure his own people will not question it?" the other man asked. "They will be busy not getting shot," Rocco replied. "And when the dust settles, they will need someone to tell them where to aim next. That someone will be me." Angelina felt the blood drain from her face. The world narrowed to the screen and the steady tick of the video timer at the bottom. On camera, Rocco clicked his tongue again. "Enough talk," he said. "Make them go." The masked men obeyed. One waved his arms, trying to provoke the smaller dog into moving. The other gave Bruto a sharp kick near the ribs. The big dog snarled reflexively, lips peeling back, but his weight still leaned away from the tiny, trembling shape in front of him. "Come on," Rocco snapped. "We do not have all night." He barked a word Angelina did not recognize, probably one used during fights, a cue Bruto had been taught to link with violence. Bruto lunged. Angelina squeezed her eyes shut for half a second and then forced them open again. She owed him that much. She watched him slam into the smaller dog, watched the mess of movement, the shadows blending, the men cheering like they were watching a sport instead of a beating. Rocco laughed and checked his watch. "Good," he said over the noise. "Get him in the van in an hour. I want him smelling like fear when he walks into that ring. Tonight's shipment rides on him doing his part and the boss standing in the right spot when the first shot goes off." The footage blurred with motion and dark patches. Someone bumped the crate where the phone was hidden, making the image jump. For a moment, the camera pointed at the ceiling and stayed there. The sound continued. Angelina heard the cheering, the growling, the sharp yip that cut off too fast. She stopped the video with a strangled sound and lowered the phone, hand shaking. Bruto pressed his head against her hip and whined softly, sensing her distress without knowing why. "It was him," she whispered. "It was you in here, while I was sleeping upstairs." Her eyes burned. She blinked hard, forcing the tears back. Crying in this room would not help Milo, or Bruto, or whatever name he carried now. Someone had taken the dog she had tried to save and turned him into a tool inside a larger plan to murder the man who currently thought he owned them both. She checked the time on the footage again. Late night, long after she had left the yard. If she had not hidden the phone, she would never have known. There was only one person she could show this to who had the power to stop what was coming, at least from inside these walls. And that person was the same man Rocco planned to kill. Angelina slipped the phone into her pocket, took a steadying breath, and opened the training room door. "Where is he?" she asked the guard outside. "In the office," he replied, startled by her sudden intensity. "Why? I need to see him," she said. "Now. It cannot wait." The guard hesitated, then nodded. "Follow me." They crossed the yard. Bruto stayed close, bumping her leg every few steps as if to reassure himself she was still there. Marino's office sat at the far end of the main building, behind a thick door with a reinforced frame. The guard knocked once and opened it without waiting. "Boss," he said, "she needs to talk to you." Marino looked up from a table covered in papers and maps. His brow furrowed. "You again," he said to Angelina. "I thought you were working the dog." "I was," she said. "This is about him, and about you." The guard shifted, clearly uncertain whether to stay. "I want to talk to him alone," Angelina added. Marino's eyes narrowed. "Since when do you give orders in my house?" he asked. "This is not an order," she said. "It is a warning. If anyone else hears it, they will take it to the wrong person before you have time to decide what to do." A beat of silence stretched. Marino flicked his fingers at the guard. "Out," he said. The man left, closing the door behind him. Bruto slipped inside before it shut and immediately moved behind Angelina, half hiding his massive body behind her legs. The sight of a feared Pitbull treating her like a shield would have been almost funny if her chest did not feel so tight. Marino noticed. His gaze dropped to the dog's positioning, then rose again. "Talk," he said. Angelina pulled out her phone. Her hands trembled so badly she had to use both to unlock it. She opened the video and held it out. "I hid a camera in the training room last night," she said. "I recorded what happens when we are not there." Marino's jaw clenched. "You recorded in my building without permission," he said. "If I had asked, someone would have moved more carefully," she replied. "I needed the truth, not a stage show. Watch, and then you can decide what you want to do with me." For a second, she thought he might refuse out of sheer pride. Then curiosity and survival pushed past offense. He took the phone. The room was quiet except for the faint sound of the video and Bruto's breathing. Marino watched himself not appear. Watched Rocco stroll into the frame instead. Watched the masked men. The cage. The smaller dog. His face did not move at first. Years of practice had taught him to keep reactions buried where no one could use them. But Angelina saw the slight tightening around his eyes when Bruto flinched from the sound of the crate hitting the floor. She saw the way his grip on the phone hardened when Rocco spoke about tonight's shipment and the perfect accident. By the time the on-screen Rocco described Marino standing in the right spot when the first shot went off, the knuckles of Marino's free hand had gone white. He let the video play a little longer, up to the point where Bruto lunged and the cheering drowned out most of the words. Then he stopped it and held the phone at his side, screen dark. The quiet that followed was heavier than any shouting. "How long have you had this?" he asked. "Minutes," she said. "I watched it right before I came here." "No copies?" he asked. "Not yet," she replied. "The phone is too old for that without a computer. But if you take it and break it, the picture in my head will not go away. I will still know what I saw." Bruto pressed closer to her, tail tucked tight. His nose nudged the back of her knee. He wanted distance from the man on the screen, even if that man was not in the room physically. Marino noticed that too. "You think this is the first time?" he asked, voice low. "I think this is the time I caught," she said. His reactions tell me it has been many times. The gate sounds, the smell, the crowd noises. He remembers all of it. Marino looked past her at some fixed point on the wall, eyes narrowed. "When I got him," he said slowly, "Rocco told me about a man who ran fights on the edge of the city. Said the man could not pay his debt. Said he offered me his best dog instead. Said it was a bargain. One visit, a quick look, and I agreed. The animal tore into a practice dummy like it was made of paper. I liked the anger. I did not ask how he got that way." He let out a short, humorless breath. "I took him home and told myself I had saved him from worse," he went on. "I told myself that under me, he would only hurt people who deserved it." Angelina swallowed. "Do you still think that?" she asked softly. He did not answer at once. His mind was clearly replaying the day in that other yard, the smells, the faces, comparing them to the clips on the screen, to Rocco's easy familiarity with cruelty. "Rocco arranged that meeting," he said finally. "He brought me there, introduced me, said he had checked everything." His hand tightened around the phone again. "I thought he was bringing me a gift," he said. "Instead, he has been walking my death up to my door 1 inch at a time." Angelina took a breath. "You could pretend you never saw this," she said. "You could walk into that warehouse and hope the bullets miss you. Or you could believe what your own dog has been trying to tell you since the moment Rocco stepped into the yard. Bruto gave a low whine, almost as if agreeing. Marino glanced at the dog, then back to her. If you had gone to anyone else with this, he said, if you had whispered it to the wrong ear, do you know what would have happened? Yes, she said. We would both be dead. Maybe the little dog in the video, too. He studied her for a long moment. You risked that anyway, he said. I did not have a choice, she replied. You brought me here. You chained me to this. If he kills you, what do you think someone like him will do with a dog that knows too much and a girl who knows more? Something flickered in his eyes that might have been respect. He looked down at the phone one more time, replayed a short section silently, then set it carefully on the desk instead of smashing it, which she half expected. When this started, he said, I thought my only problem was a dog that did not listen. Turns out I have a man who has been sharpening knives behind my back for years. He straightened, shoulders squaring. I cannot let this leak, he said. If the others smell weakness, everything I built cracks. If Rocco suspects I know before I am ready, he will vanish or strike early. We cannot shout this from the rooftops. We have to cut out in one move. Ow, Angelina asked. Marino's gaze turned cold. You want to fight at the warehouse, he said. He wants a crowd, a shipment, chaos, and a convenient death. Fine. He picked up the phone again and pocketed it. We will give him a fight at the warehouse, he said quietly. But it will not be the one he thinks he planned. Angelina didn't need any more explanation. She understood what he meant. They had a plan now, a plan to trap Rocco in his own game. The days leading up to the event were a blur of preparation. Marino's team moved through the shadows, setting up the trap with a quiet precision that made everything feel more real. Security was placed in key spots, their eyes sharp and watchful, ready for any sign of trouble. Marino's men were everywhere, standing by the perimeter, watching the street and the warehouse entrances. The crowd that would come to gamble on the dogfights wouldn't know the real game being played. And in a way, that was the most dangerous part, the distraction. Marino trusted no one. That's why they were planning this in the dark. This wasn't just about Bruto fighting for a crowd. This was about Rocco and his secret betrayal, the deadly conspiracy that Marino needed to shut down before it destroyed him. But even in the quiet of their planning, the weight of what was about to happen sat heavily on Angelina's chest. She spent every moment with Bruto, working him in the training yard. She kept things simple, no flashy moves or distractions. Every command was clear and consistent, just as she had done before when they were in the shelter. The difference now was that she wasn't just training a dog. She was preparing for a fight. She was preparing him for something that in the back of her mind felt like a war. Bruto responded well, but she could feel the tension in his body. The old habits, the memories of pain and fear were still there. Each time a loud noise echoed through the yard or a scent triggered him, she saw his muscles stiffen. His body tensed. He wasn't just the dog she had helped heal at the shelter. He was a weapon now, and he knew it. As the day of the event drew closer, Marino's presence became more commanding. His eyes never left her when she worked with Bruto. He never gave instructions. He simply watched, calculating, judging. And every time she looked up to meet his gaze, she saw the same weight of responsibility in his eyes. He wasn't just training Bruto. He was testing her. And deep down, she knew that failure wasn't an option. The night of the event, the atmosphere in the warehouse was suffocating. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, stale beer, and the sharp scent of fear that seeped from the dogs behind the bars. The crowds had gathered, loud and raucous, eager for the blood that would soon spill. The metal gates screeched as the dogs were moved into place, barking and growling in anticipation. Angelina could feel the tension in her own chest, but she tried to keep her breathing steady. Bruto stood beside her, his body still and alert, the chain slack in her hand. His tail twitched once, then went still. She crouched down beside him, her fingers brushing through the fur on his neck. He looked up at her, his eyes wide but trusting. She could feel the weight of the situation in the way he moved with her. She had no doubt that he knew what was coming. The warehouse was packed. The crowd roared as bets were placed. the atmosphere thick with the anticipation of violence. People screamed for their favorites, cursed the dogs they didn't like. The sounds of dogs barking, cages rattling, and the faint smell of gasoline and cheap cologne made everything feel overwhelming. It was exactly what Brutto feared. But now, it was her responsibility to make him ignore that fear, to make him fight for her, for the plan. Rocco stood at the edge of the arena, his cold eyes scanning the room. He moved through the crowd like he was one of them, a part of the spectacle. But in the back of his mind, he was already thinking about the real plan. He didn't care about the dogs. He didn't care about the show. He cared about the opportunity to take Marino down. Marino, as usual, was a quiet presence in the back of the room. He watched the crowd, his gaze fixed on the action, but his mind was elsewhere. He knew what was coming. He knew the trap was set. But the question was whether he would be able to outsmart Rocco before the trap closed around him. Angelina's mind raced as she glanced around the room. There were men positioned at every exit, their eyes sharp. But even with all the security, she could feel the danger pressing in on all sides. Rocco's hidden agenda was clear now. He didn't want to fight. He wanted chaos. He wanted the distraction, the noise, the opportunity to make a move on Marino while everyone was focused on the dogfight. And when the fight was over, he would leave with everything he wanted, except Marino. Angelina swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay focused. She had a job to do. She had to get through this fight and make sure Brutto didn't give in to the panic, the fear that had been driven into him for so long. "Are you ready?" Marino asked her, his voice low, but carrying the weight of 100 unspoken words. She nodded, but her stomach twisted with fear. If anything went wrong, she and Marino would both die. There was no backup plan. There was no safety net. And then the gates opened. The crowd erupted into cheers, the noise deafening. Brutto stepped forward with her, his body tense, his movements careful. He was walking into a pit, not just to fight, but to show the world that he was more than a monster on a leash. Angelina kept her hand steady on his collar, guiding him forward. She couldn't look at the crowd. She couldn't look at Rocco or his men, waiting in the shadows for their chance to strike. She only had to focus on Brutto, on his movements, on the bond they had forged. The first dog was released into the ring, a snarling, wild-eyed creature. It lunged toward Brutto, but Angelina spoke a soft command, and Brutto hesitated, eyes locked on her. The tension in his body relaxed, just a little. She spoke the words again, guiding him into position, letting him know that he had control. The dog in front of him circled, waiting for the first move. But Brutto was not ready to fight just yet. He stepped back, his body still. The second dog lunged forward again, but Brutto sidestepped, keeping his distance. The crowd roared in frustration. They wanted blood, they wanted action. But what they didn't see was the way Brutto's eyes flicked toward the shadows, the way he seemed to sense something off. He wasn't just avoiding the fight. He was waiting for the right moment. And that moment came when Rocco's men moved toward the side of the arena, making a subtle shift in their position. One of them made the mistake of drawing a weapon from under his jacket, the gun glinting under the dim lights. Brutto saw it. Before Angelina could react, the dog turned, his body snapping into action, and he lunged toward the man with the gun. The room went silent for a split second as the crowd processed what had happened. Then chaos. Rocco's plan had just been exposed. The fight wasn't in the ring anymore. It was in the shadows where Rocco thought he had control. The Pitbull stood between Angelina and the chaos around them, his fur bristling, his breath quick but steady. The crowd, once roaring with anticipation, began to murmur in confusion as the tension in the air thickened. Rocco's plan, the one he'd orchestrated so carefully, was slipping from his grasp. In front of them, the opposing dog lunged at Brutto, teeth bared, an animal trained for violence. But Brutto didn't respond the way the crowd expected. He didn't charge. He didn't fight. Instead, Brutto stood still, his body tense, but his gaze locked on Angelina's face. She whispered the command softly, just as she had countless times before, but Brutto did not move forward. He didn't attack. His eyes were fixed on her, and for a moment, it felt as though the entire world stood still. The crowd, still unsure of what to make of it, started to quiet down. They didn't understand. They didn't see the bond between the dog and the woman. They didn't know what was coming. And then it happened. Bruto slowly turned his head away from the opponent and locked eyes with Rocco. The shift was subtle but undeniable. The dog knew who the real threat was. The tension in the air deepened, and for a fleeting moment, Rocco's confident smile faltered. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, confused. What was happening? Why wasn't the dog attacking the other animal? Angelina's heart pounded in her chest as she saw it. A flash of understanding in Bruto's eyes. It wasn't about the fight. It was about justice. Bruto wasn't afraid of the other dog. He was afraid of something far worse. The shift was instant. Bruto surged forward, not toward the opponent, but toward Rocco. "Bruto, no!" Angelina shouted, but it was too late. In one swift, fluid movement, Bruto charged, his muscles coiling and then exploding with raw power. Rocco's eyes widened in shock as the dog barreled toward him. He fumbled for the gun tucked under his jacket, his hand trembling, but Bruto was already upon him. With a powerful leap, the Pitbull knocked Rocco's hand away, sending the gun flying across the dirt floor of the warehouse. The sound of the weapon skidding across the ground echoed in the stillness. "Stop!" Rocco shouted, his voice trembling for the first time, fear seeping into the edges of his words. But it was too late. Bruto had made his choice. The dog stood over Rocco, pinning him to the ground, his teeth bared but not moving to strike. It was as if Bruto was daring him to do something, anything. The crowd had gone silent, unsure of what to make of the scene unfolding before them. Angelina's voice cut through the tension, steady and clear. "Rocco is the one you should fear," she shouted, her words ringing out over the chaos. "Rocco is the one who has been abusing this dog, using him for his own twisted games. This is not just a fight. It's a betrayal." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Every person in the warehouse, from the gamblers in the stands to the men who had placed their bets, was now listening. The truth was out in the open, and Rocco could no longer hide behind his lies. "I have the recordings," she continued, her voice cutting through the stillness. "I've seen everything. Rocco has been using Bruto in underground dogfights, putting him through hell to line his pockets. And tonight, he was planning to kill Marino." Rocco's face went pale. His gaze shifted to the men in the crowd who had been working for him, his allies, the ones he thought he could trust. They stared back at him with wide eyes, the truth finally settling in. The shift was subtle, but it was undeniable. Rocco's men, once loyal to him, now looked unsure. Their hands hovered near their weapons, but none of them made a move. The realization that Rocco had betrayed them, that he had been the one pulling the strings behind Marino's back, hung heavy in the air. Rocco's eyes flicked to the men he had once commanded. "You don't understand," he said, his voice trembling now. "This is all for Marino's good. I was just making sure he stayed safe. He had to trust me, don't you see? This wasn't about me. It was about protecting him." But there was no turning back now. The men who had followed him for years were beginning to turn their eyes away, their loyalty cracking. Bruto, still standing over Rocco, growled softly, his eyes unblinking as he watched the man squirm beneath him. The dog wasn't about to let him go. Not now, not after everything he had endured. Rocco, now pinned beneath the weight of his own deceit, let out a strangled gasp. "Please," he begged, his voice barely audible. "Please don't." But it was too late. The truth had been exposed. His empire, built on fear and lies, was crumbling around him. Angelina stepped forward, her eyes hard and unyielding. "You've lied to everyone," she said, her voice steady. "And now you'll pay for it." Rocco's once confident facade shattered. His shoulders slumped, and he looked up at her with pleading eyes. "I did it for the family," he whispered. "I did it for the power." "The power?" Angelina echoed. "The power to destroy everything Marino built? The power to turn a dog into a monster? You're no better than the people you claim to protect him from." The words hung in the air like a sentence, and Rocco knew there was no escape. His fate was sealed, and the people who had once followed him were beginning to turn on him. Bruto, sensing the shift in the air, stepped back, but he didn't take his eyes off Rocco. His growl softened into a quiet rumble, the tension leaving his body as he slowly backed away. The men who had been loyal to Rocco finally made their move. One by one, they lowered their weapons and stepped away, breaking their allegiance to the man who had betrayed them all. Rocco, still on the ground, struggled to push himself up, but the weight of his actions crushed him. He looked around the warehouse, his once strong grip on power slipping through his fingers. "I never wanted it to end like this," he muttered, his voice breaking. "It's over," Angelina said, her words final. "You've lost." Rocco's eyes flicked to Marino, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, his gaze steady and unreadable. The Mafia boss stepped forward, his presence commanding the room. "We're done here," Marino said, his voice low but certain. "Get him out of my sight." Rocco's men moved quickly, surrounding him and pulling him to his feet. But even they could not mask the disgust in their eyes. Angelina stood tall, her chest rising and falling with the weight of the moment. Bruto walked beside her, his steps slow and cautious, but no longer tense. As the sound of sirens began to echo in the distance, Marino turned to Angelina. "Take Bruto," he said quietly. "Get out of here first. I'll handle the rest." The words hung in the air as they left the warehouse. It was over. Rocco's reign had crumbled, and the truth had finally come to light. The crowd had dispersed, and the silence that filled the warehouse felt like the calm after a storm. Angelina walked with Bruto at her side, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on her. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The warehouse had been raided swiftly after Rocco's downfall. The night had turned to chaos, and sirens echoed for what felt like hours. Law enforcement moved in quickly, clearing the building, arresting Rocco's men as they tried to flee. Rocco himself, once untouchable, was handcuffed and dragged into the back of an unmarked van, his face pale and resigned. Marino stood by, a dark figure in the midst of the storm, his eyes fixed on the scene. He'd survived the trap. He had made it through Rocco's betrayal, but he was not the same man. The power he had wielded was no longer the thing that defined him. The quiet weight of loss hung in the air, and in his eyes, it was clear that he was still processing everything that had happened. The pieces of Rocco's empire were crumbling, but there was still more to come. That much was certain. Angelina sat in her small apartment above the diner, staring out the window, the night settling quietly outside. It had been a week since the chaos at the warehouse. A week since she and Bruto had walked out of that nightmare and into the uncertain future that lay before them. Bruto was stretched out on the floor, curled up with his head resting on his paws. He had not slept that soundly since the day she had met him. The scars, both physical and emotional, seemed to have settled, at least for now. The nightmare still came. She knew that. She could see it in the way his eyes flickered when he slept, the subtle tremor in his legs. But for now, the dog she had fought to heal was at peace. Angelina finally allowed herself to breathe. The fear that had clung to her for so long was fading, replaced by a quiet sense of relief. She had done what she set out to do. She had protected Bruto, exposed the truth, and survived. But even as she sank into the quiet of her apartment, a sense of purpose began to creep in. She had learned more than she ever expected to about loyalty, betrayal, and survival. The fight had never really been about just one dog. It had been about so much more. And now, she couldn't ignore the pull of something deeper. The sound of a knock at the door startled her, and she turned to find Marino standing in the hallway, his broad frame filling the doorway. He looked out of place, standing there in the dim light of the apartment, his presence heavy and unexpected. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly, his voice unfamiliar in its hesitation. Angelina stood for a moment, unsure, before nodding slowly. She stepped aside to let him in, her gaze flickering to Bruto, who was watching them from the floor with a quiet intensity. Marino didn't sit. Instead, he moved into the room, his eyes scanning the modest space as if trying to understand her world. "I wanted to thank you," he said after a moment, his voice guarded, as if the words were difficult to form. "For what you did. For everything." Angelina said nothing at first, just nodded, her throat tight. There were so many things she wanted to say to him, so many questions, so much anger that had built up over the past days. But for some reason, she couldn't bring herself to voice it. Not now. I don't expect you to forgive me, Marino continued, shifting uncomfortably. But I needed to say it. You didn't have to risk everything for a dog or for me. But you did. And for that, I'm grateful. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He handed it to her without a word, and she took it with a steady hand, opening it carefully. Inside were cash and documents, a bank transfer receipt, and a note. The note read simply, "Asterisk for your mother's care. I can't undo the past, but I can help make sure the future is easier. Asterisk." She didn't know what to say. The words felt too small, too simple for everything that had happened between them. Instead, she tucked the envelope into her bag, her fingers lingering on the edge of it. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll make sure it goes to the right place." Marino nodded, his expression unreadable. "There's something else I wanted to ask you." Angelina raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I'm planning on starting a center for abused dogs," he said. "A real one. Not a place where they're trained to fight, but a place where they can heal. I've seen what's been done to them, and I'm not willing to sit back and let it happen anymore." Angelina was silent for a moment, processing what he was saying. She had known Marino was a man of power, but she hadn't realized just how deeply the events of the past weeks had affected him. The idea of a dog rescue center wasn't just about making amends. It was about turning his empire into something that could create real change. A place for dogs like Bruto to be free, to be more than just weapons. "I'm in," she said finally, her voice firm. "But there are conditions. I'll run it. I'll train them. I'll make sure they're ready for a real life, not a fight. I won't back down, and I won't let you use this to make money off of their pain." Marino met her gaze, his eyes searching hers. There was no hesitation in his expression. "Agreed," he said, his voice steady. "You'll have full control. I'll back you however you need." She could feel the weight of the moment, the understanding between them settling into place. They were both broken in different ways, but together they could build something that mattered, something that could heal what had been destroyed. "I'll start looking for properties," she said, determination in her voice. "But I need more than just a building. I need support. I need people who believe in this." "I'll make sure you have everything you need," Marino replied. "You'll have my full support. But this is your vision now. I'm just here to help you make it happen." The room fell silent for a moment, and then Marino turned toward the door. "Thank you," he said again, this time with a finality that felt different. "For everything." As he left, Angelina stood there for a long moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy, and she knew there would be challenges. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She had a purpose, a new mission, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was in control of her own future. Brito, sensing the shift, padded over to her and nudged her leg with his head, as if asking what came next. She smiled softly and knelt to scratch behind his ears. "We're going to change things," she murmured. "Together." But before she could say anything more, there was a soft knock at the door. Angelina stood, her gaze flicking to the door and then back to Bruto. Something told her that whatever came next, things were about to get a lot more complicated. She opened the door to find the diner owner standing there, looking at her with a puzzled expression. "Angelina," he said, his voice low, "can I ask you something?" She smiled faintly. "Sure." He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder before speaking. "Why does Marino keep coming by?" he asked. "He's been dropping off envelopes, checking in. People are starting to notice." Angelina's smile faltered slightly as she met his curious gaze. The weight of her new life was beginning to sink in. She had a lot to explain and even more to figure out, but that too could wait. For now, she had a new beginning ahead of her, and whatever came next, she knew she had the strength to face it. 6 weeks had passed since that night at the warehouse. 6 weeks since the world she knew had been turned upside down, and yet, as she stood in the quiet of the newly repurposed warehouse, there was a strange peace that had settled over her. The building that had once echoed with violence and fear now hummed with the sound of healing. The space was simple, no frills, just sturdy wooden crates, soft mats on the floor, and an area for exercise. The scent of freshly cleaned surfaces mixed with the faint smell of the dogs who had found refuge here. Angelina stood at the center of the room, watching as a dog, a small Pitbull mix, took its first hesitant steps toward her. She crouched down, extending her hand slowly, her voice soothing as the dog sniffed the air before inching closer. "That's it," she murmured. "You're doing great. You're safe now." The dog sniffed her hand, then licked it cautiously. Slowly, it sat down, its tail wagging faintly. Angelina smiled, a soft warmth blooming in her chest. She had helped countless dogs like this one find their confidence, but with each new dog, it still felt like the first time. Behind her, a few of the volunteers she had recruited, people who had shown up wanting to make a difference, were working with other animals. The center was small, for now, but it was growing. Word had spread quickly about the dog rescue operation she was running, and each day brought more people willing to help. Marino's quiet support had made all the difference, and while the Mafia boss remained a ghost behind the scenes, his funding ensured the place could stay open. "Good job, Gus," she said as the small dog finally lay down on his mat, content and relaxed. "You've made progress." Angelina stood, wiping her hands on her jeans and taking a step back. She glanced at the clock on the wall, her mind already ticking through her next tasks for the day. The rescue center was growing, but it was a labor of love and sweat. There was still a long way to go. Outside the warehouse, the world had continued on, oblivious to the transformations taking place inside the walls of the building. But to Angelina, this was everything. This was the future she had envisioned. The diner had also changed, and it wasn't just the inside. The neighborhood felt different. In the weeks that had followed the events with Rocco, rumors had spread like wildfire. Some whispered about Marino's involvement, others about the mysterious woman who had walked into the chaos that night and somehow emerged unscathed. But the biggest change came with Bruto. No longer was he the monster everyone feared. People who once crossed the street to avoid the sight of Marino's Pitbull now found themselves pausing to look at him from a distance. It started with a few curious onlookers. Then the kids began to gather, carefully at first, unsure if the dog was still dangerous. But Angelina had made sure that Bruto, for all his past scars, was more than just an instrument of terror. Under her guidance, he had softened. He had learned to trust again, just as she had. One afternoon, as Angelina walked Bruto along the sidewalk outside the diner, a small group of children approached. Their eyes were wide with curiosity, but they didn't run. They didn't step back. They stood there, hesitating for only a moment before one of them stepped forward and gently extended a hand toward the dog. "Can we pet him?" a boy asked, his voice tentative. Angelina glanced down at Bruto, whose tail was wagging softly. His eyes were calm, his body relaxed. She nodded. "He's safe," she said, her voice warm. "Just be gentle." The children gathered around, cautiously reaching out to pet Bruto. At first, he stood still, unsure, but then he leaned into the touch, his eyes softening. The kids laughed, delighted as they stroked his fur. The Pitbull, who once had the power to strike terror into the hearts of anyone who crossed his path, now stood as the center of attention for a group of children who were discovering a new side to him. Marino stood across the street, leaning against a lamppost, his hands shoved into his pockets. He watched the scene with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. He had never seen Bruto act this way. He had never seen himself act this way. Marino's usual cold, calculating demeanor had softened in recent weeks. The events with Rocco had changed him, just as they had changed Angelina. The power he once wielded through fear had lost its hold on him. He had seen firsthand how loyalty, trust, and compassion could create something stronger than intimidation. He watched as Bruto continued to interact with the kids, his stance relaxed, his demeanor patient. A slow smile tugged at the corner of his lips, something he hadn't allowed himself in years. Later that evening, as the diner closed and the night settled in, there was a soft knock at Angelina's apartment door. She opened it to find Marino standing there, his usual imposing figure softened by the cool night air. He was carrying a small box, his posture slightly hesitant. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. Angelina stepped aside to let him in. She had learned to expect his visits, though she never really knew what to expect from him. Their relationship, if it could even be called that, had shifted in the past few weeks. It wasn't about the power or the business anymore. It was about something more complicated, a shared understanding that they both had a role to play in the world, and that role didn't have to be defined by fear. Marino placed the box on the table and looked at her, his eyes steady. "I've been thinking," he said slowly. "You've given everything for this place, this dog. I can't tell you what it means to me. What it means to Bruto." Angelina didn't speak at first, just watched him with cautious curiosity. He cleared his throat, running a hand through his hair. "I want to help more. You've been doing this alone for far too long. You've been doing the work I should have been doing, and I want to make it right." He opened the box, revealing stacks of donation slips and signed agreements. "This is a commitment, not just to you, but to the future you're building. I'll fund this center for as long as it takes. It's yours. You're in charge, but I'll make sure you have everything you need." Angelina looked at the papers, then back at him. She knew this was his way of showing respect, but she also knew it was more than that. This was his way of stepping away from the empire he had built with fear and instead supporting the kind of future that was based on trust. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "I won't let you down." The next morning, as the sun began to rise over the diner, the streets looked different. The fear that had once defined the corner had faded. People walked past the diner, no longer crossing the street when they saw Bruto. They smiled at the kids who were learning to trust the Pitbull, and at the woman who had somehow become the bridge between the dangerous past and the hopeful future. As Angelina walked Bruto past the diner that morning, the neon sign flickered on, casting its warm light across the street. The Pitbull who had once caused fear now walked calmly beside her, his head high, his body relaxed. The air felt lighter, the street quieter, as if the city itself had taken a collective breath. Marino stepped out from the shadows of the alleyway, his hands in his pockets, watching them with a slight smile on his face. He said nothing as he joined them, walking beside them as they moved down the street. There were no words between them, no need for them. The street that once feared Bruto now saw him for what he truly was, more than just a weapon of violence. He was a symbol of change, a reminder that even the most broken things could be healed. And for the first time in a long time, the street felt at peace. The story closed on a quiet scene. The once feared dog, now a companion, walked alongside the woman who had given him a second chance. The Mafia boss, who had once ruled through fear, now walked with them, not as a king, but as someone who had learned that true power came not from domination, but from loyalty and compassion. And together, they walked into a new chapter.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.